everyone, and welcome to the Death by Adaptation podcast, a bi-weekly book club where we choose one classic book and compare and contrast it against its cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolò Grasso, and I'm joined, as always, by the great Ewan Gleadow. How are you doing, Ewan?
I'm doing good. I've not been sick in my mouth yet, so I'd say that's a net positive.
Yes.
I'm a little fragile today because I drank my body weight in alcohol yesterday. But I think it through the good love of Halloween that we all have, I should be able to manage. I should be okay.
Amen.
I don't like
Amen
Halloween,
to that.
but
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of it either. I had
no.
massive, childhood trauma related to it. Just opening up the door when I was 3 years old to like a headless person and someone with a knife through their head. It was, it's a bit spooky. It's a bit too much for a 3-year-old. But today we're going to be talking about a spooky time, and we cannot do that alone, which is why we have the lovely Carson Timar of Clappercast fame here with us today. How are you doing, Carson?
I am doing fantastic. Excited to be on my favorite movie podcast to guest on. Asked me a week ago would have been my favorite, but now that's tied with don't listen to this podcast. And I say this is my favorite movie podcast. But no, very excited. A true jump scare for the fans. I'm sure that I'm on this, but happy Halloween. I also hate Halloween, to be clear, like for the record. So
Hey, we're a jolly bunch here.
It's shite, isn't it? It's awful.
It's too much candy as well. It's unhealthy,
Yeah, it's why we get like the door knockers. What are they called? Trick or treaters. We get trick or treaters, and
door knockers.
I open the door often with like just a bag of candy in my hand. It's like, sorry, we don't give them here. And I just shovel in Maltesers in my mouth. Like, sorry, we've got nothing. No, nothing for you. Really put them in their place. I really don't like it when people knock on the door at the best of times, unless they're giving me an muscle. No, and I think that whole appeal of Halloween for me is just brushed over as it's an excuse to drink, which it is. But at the same time, it's like, I really don't like Halloween. I don't get it. I don't want to sit and get scared, which when I was told I watched 10 episodes of a horror film directed by Mike Flanagan, of all people, I knew I was in for a bit of the old scary time.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's Halloween. It's good to celebrate. After talking about another spooky story with Luca Guadagnino's bones and all, it's nice to go with something more classic, something more more acclaimed that's been interpreted many times. But of course, before we dive into that, as always, are you listening to this on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, on Anchor, wherever you are? Consider leaving a like, 5 stars, a follow, subscribe. Whatever rocks your boat, we appreciate you listening to this and maybe coming back for more in the future. Who knows? There's good stuff on the horizon. But now, without further ado, let's talk about The Haunting of Hill House.
Scandal, murder, insanity, suicide. The history of Hill House was ideal. It had everything I wanted. It was built 90-odd, very odd years ago by a man named Hugh Crane as a home for his wife and daughter in the most remote part of New England he could find. It was an evil house from the beginning, a house that was born bad. Hugh Crane's young wife died seconds before she was to set eyes on the house. She was killed when, for no apparent reason, the horses bolted, crashing her carriage against a big tree.
The Haunting of Hill House is originally a novel, a 1959 book by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson was one of the most acclaimed and beloved writers of her time. She has written, among other famous stories, she's written the short story The Lottery, which is very famous, very acclaimed, very disturbing, and she's also written Hangs a Man, We Always Lived in the Castle. She's written a whole bunch of very uncomfortable and psychologically deep gothic, horror, ghost stories, and dramas. A very troubled individual. I don't know if you guys have read anything else by her outside of The Haunting of Hill House, but she lived quite the life, and she sadly passed away when I want to say like a year after the first adaptation of Haunting of Hill House came out, when she was not even 50, she was 48 years old. She was ready to live her life again. She was suffering from anxiety, and she was not leaving her house. It's a very sad and depressing story, which is fitting considering the book that we're talking about, The Haunting of Hill House. where a doctor just decides to do a little bit of a social experiment. Let's get some people with maybe supernatural phenomena haunting them throughout their entire life, and let's just drop him in this lovely little mansion, Hill House, and just have them spend a couple weeks there, a month, whatever, just enough to get to know them and have some fun studies. And of course, a lot of people reply to the ad, but only four show up. And one of those people is Eleanor, a woman who, let's just say, she's not doing well. She's not in a good spot mentally, emotionally, poor lady. And what she experiences together with the other three people in this house, in this mansion, well, it's going to change her life for the better or for the worse. Who knows? Carson, what are your thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson?
Yes. Immediately caught off guard. I did not read this obviously before I watched the Mike Flanagan series. So I was immediately caught off guard with like, it's just very different. It's not what I thought it was going to be. But that doesn't mean it's bad. I think this is a fantastic novel. Horror literature, obviously it's a big thing. I don't want to make it seem like it's not a thing. But like, I think it's a very difficult road to walk when you take away basically every single one of your senses except the
Mm.
sight of the words, and then having to create like a visceral experience that is horrifying, especially in today's context where like you can turn on the news and just like see people die, right? Like it's a very desensitized world we're living in. But I think this book, the way it blends horror and dread and those deeper emotions of darkness with like a scientific overlay, I guess, of language and structure. It's some like poetic writing at times. I really dug this. I think it is lovely. I like the story a lot better than what Flanagan does. Spoiler alert, we'll get there. But like,
Oh,
I think this is very, very well done. Um, I think it's hard to be like, oh, it's a classic for October. I'm going to read every year because I don't really read books annually like that. But like, I would definitely like want to read this like again during Halloween season. It's a very good spooky text.
nice. Yeah, I'm actually the same. We've not. I don't think I've barely reread books in my life. Like I sort of maybe this podcast and a couple of books when I was younger. It's just not something that comes to me because it's a bigger commitment than other things, kind of like doing it annually. But the fact that this is very short, we're talking about less than 200 pages long, makes it for a very breezy read.
Yeah.
But Ewan, what are your thoughts?
I thought it was, pretty good. Pretty much going to echo what Carson said. It's very atmospheric. It's very interesting. I read this before I'd actually seen Haunting a Hill House. I know Haunting a Hill House was like 2020. It was like the height of COVID when it released, and everybody was like, "Oh, you need to watch this. You've literally no excuse not to watch it. You are stuck indoors." And I still found excuses to get out of watching it. And I know they did Bly Manor as well, and there was offshoots and everything like that. And it
Yeah.
never interested me. It never phased me. But that's just my relationship with horror. Is if it's not Mario Bava, I don't really care. So going into the Shirley Jackson piece was kind of like just a nice entry point. Really, it was really nice. It's a lovely bit of horror. Like you said there, Nick, it's very brief. It's barely 200 pages. I read this on my lunch breaks at work, which was really nice. You know, writing about murders and then reading about haunted houses, and then going back and actually writing about a haunted house was quite the fitting shift.
You did
I think
research, you could say.
I did. You know me. You can prove anything with fact, Nick, and I always research.
True that.
Apart from all the other episodes we've done. It's quite intimate. I like how intimate the horror gets in this, and it's very not highbrow, but it's very smart with how it finds itself and how it perceives its own horrors, which is something like Carson touched on is changed for the worse in Flanagan's piece. And I'm sure we'll get into that later because my god, I can't believe I took 10 hours of my fucking life watching that. But that's okay. We all make mistakes in the heart of passion. We all do things we don't need to do for the sake of Shirley Jackson's name. Now, this was my first Jackson piece. Very atmospheric. I would definitely read more of her work, but I don't think I would read Haunting a Hill House again. Mainly because, like you have said, I don't have time to read books more than once. I'm trying to get as much knowledge into my brain as humanly possible before I die, and rereading something does not help. I've got to read like the John le Carre novels. I've got to read the Don Puzo novels. I've got to read more stuff. I can't go back to the 200 pages of Shirley Jackson being like, oh, there might be something in a cupboard or up the stairs. It's great, but I'm not gonna do it again. I know what's happening now. You know.
It's a one and done deal, you could say, for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good deal. It's a really good deal because of how short it is and how atmospheric it is, and it's really nicely character driven, which you don't quite get a lot with, especially horror in the 80s, for instance, like the slasher genre. You don't get character driven horror that much, which is a shame. But there are always, a couple of what's the word? A couple of
exceptions.
Sorry, my exceptions. My brain's been pickled by vodka. A couple of exceptions to the rule, of course, like something like Hellraiser, for instance, is very
great example.
The emotion is at the core. It's a great example. As far as actually using horror elements to elevate characters, I think Haunted Hill House does it so nicely. It's great.
Yeah, I have to agree with both of you on this. I went into this similar to you to without having read anything else by Shirley Jackson. I mean, this is also a book podcast, but I knew most of her life based on the 2020 movie Shirley, starring Elizabeth Moss, which is very good. I have to say, I really enjoyed that. I don't know if it's judging by Carson's face, probably a very controversial take.
No, I love that. I just never put that
Hey!
together. Never put it together. I'm stupid.
Hey.
Wow.
No, I was like, if it weren't for nasty COVID earlier this month, I was aiming to actually read Hangs a Man and also watch the movie again, because that's about like kind of the making of that book. It's very fascinating, but that's kind of the extent of what I knew about her, outside of like, oh yeah, she wrote Hill House. And so, having watched the show and having watched both adaptations already going into this book this year, I was shocked by how much I loved it. Like, I was not expecting to just fall in love with this place, but most importantly, like you said, Ewan, with these characters. I think the way Shirley Jackson writes this, almost it's all in third person, but she goes deep into the psyche of each character, but primarily of Eleanor. There are some sections in here where you're just following the way she's relating to other people, where she's feeling anxiety of like, I just said this thing, and maybe they're gonna laugh at me because I said that, so I'm gonna try to say something better now. She makes a joke just to distract them from something that maybe is embarrassing that she said. Like, there are so many parts in here with the writing that are so personal. I don't know if they came from a personal place deep inside Shirley's heart, but they feel so much like someone's lived through experiences that I connected to it in a way I was not expecting, and it kind of elevates the horror of the piece, because one of the ingenious parts about this book is that it comes from a kind of brought, looking at the history of literature, it kind of brought the second wave of Gothic narratives and Gothic horror back into the foray, because you've had your Henry James, The Turn of the Screw, and Castle of no, it's Cask of Armadillo is Edgar Allan Poe, I think. No, there's the castle. There's another castle haunted house story. I've not done proper research. There's another book, a classic Gothic novella from the late 19th century, that kind of, they're all about the same thing. They're all about, these ghost stories set in these massive mansions, and there's weddings, and there's things go bump in the night. But Shirley Jackson brings it into the era of psychology, and she brings a lot of ambiguity into this piece. She kind of leans more into the supernatural than something like the 1963 film that we'll get into. But I'm curious to know how you guys feel about the horror in here. What scared you about this book? What made you uncomfortable? What did you find emotionally affecting about, you know, these nights where Eleanor is together with this other lady, Theodora, just scared in bed with these massive noises in the hallways, and the doors are banging, and what's happening, and there's writings on the wall. How did you guys feel about this?
It's a really effective way of highlighting the simplicity of horror, essentially. You could not get away now with a horror film this year and say it's like, oh, the wind. That's not going to cut it. You can't have horror
No.
that's like a door slamming shut, or like a tree bristling against the window, which are all like classic tropes of the genre that have
Yeah.
now been around for so long that I can think of comedy films that have mocked them. Scooby-Doo, the Loch Ness Monster did that stuff. And it's like, I think for me, I really like that simplicity, and the fact that simplicity can actually have an appealing effect. especially on the characters, is so important for what Jackson does here. You're never quite sure whether or not it's all just in the imagination or if there actually is something haunting. And I think that's so difficult to do because genuinely the only other example I can think of is Eddie Murphy's Haunted House, which doesn't do it well. I don't watch many horror films.
The classic gothic horror.
A Disney Plus exclusive these days.
It's coming back. It is coming back.
God, it is, yeah. But so is Naked Gun with Liam Neeson, apparently. But
what?
Yeah, to get back on the old haunting of HH train. I think that the real appeal for me is that the simplicity of horror is actually touched on quite frequently. It is a real strong working, and I don't think that works if your prose isn't solid, because Shirley Jackson here takes a big risk gambling on the fact that people are going to be afraid of, everyday events. We've all heard doors slam. We've all heard, like, the wind pick up a bit. And I think almost entirely it's based on atmosphere and how it affects the characters, and that is always found in the wordplay, that is always found in the dialogue and the character interaction. So I think the strongest part for me with Shirley Jackson's writing is her character dimensions and the essential relationship between them all. It never feels strained, it never feels like implausible, even though they're on about a haunting. It's amazing how easily Jackson manages to suspend disbelief. It's just such a simple, clear cut of just go with it. Just go with it. And it's very easy to, because it's a very inviting text, despite it being rather cold and harsh and quite mean-spirited at times, which is, delightful to see. But how we write about that and how we perceive it always comes down to how well it's written off. With Jackson, for instance, it's just, it feels like the everyday, and making it feel like the everyday makes it feel even scarier, because it's sort of, there is always that supernatural element, the paranormal, like you mentioned, Nick, where it's, a bit more than you'd expect of a horror writer, but to have that paranormal element underneath it really just normalizes it, which is so exciting. I think Stephen King does it fairly well. I think Jackson does it better here, where it's taking something that's just completely out of it, something that would not happen, and making it feel normal. I mean, we'll get onto the film. Can't remember the guy's name. Robert Wise.
Robert Wise, yeah.
Robert Wise. That's the one. That's the fella. Again, it's the similarity that he has with Jackson's work, which is making the very basic normal structures of essentially being with strangers in a haunted building normal, and it's terrifying. I think it's the strongest piece of their work, and it's the weakest bit of Flanagan's.
God, yeah, not to sound like a complete broken record, but like could not agree more. Specifically, we'll talk about it when we get to the movie, because I will like watch the movie halfway through Flanagan's series, and I was like, in Flanagan's series, you get not jump ahead, but like you get all these like demon women, and like you get demons, and like I was so much more afraid by like everything in the movie that was so simple. I think it's so refreshing to see horror that's simplified and not just these big monsters. And you can see that changing tide in horror, at least cinema, from like, look at the original Blair Witch and the original Paranormal Activity or whatever, to like the fifth sequels of each. And like, then you're seeing the fucking witch. How do you see the witch? That's the one rule. But like, it's so refreshing, because I'm not like, when you immediately add like, oh, there's a demon standing over the child, or like this thing, like you see this big loud monster, whatever. It's like, yeah, the iconography can be unsettling. It can be creepy. The jump scare can be scary when you play a like huge loud noise, but like clearly that puts your work in a state of like fiction. I'm never going to believe that like this demon is right here, or like I'm never in my life had a lived experience where I wake up and there's just like a demon next to me. But I have had moments where like I'm in a house and I'm afraid because I hear a bang, or because like a tree rattles against a window. So I could not agree more with you. And I think it's so interesting to see something that on paper is so lesser when it comes to horror actually achieve just so much more. I think it's the biggest shame of the horror genre, is that there's no like confidence in these basic simple things anymore, to the point where like horror movies are now like adding dream sequences so they can have a monster or something, and then it's like, oh, it's wake up and it's not real. Like, just trust the creepiness, trust the tension, trust like the horror of these small experiences, because it's so effective when you just really like have that confidence, which is something the book has, it's something the original movie has. it's something that Mike Flanagan does not have. But yeah, I really thought it was like those small moments and some of the poetry. I mean, like in the beginning, there's a line that's like, whatever is in there walks alone or stuff like that. Like there is this real sense of poetry that like, as an English major, like really touched me. Really like, ooh, that's good. That's what I sink my teeth into.
Yes, the opening and closing descriptions of and lines of the Haunting of Hill House, which are also used in every adaptation in one form or another, verbatim. They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful. There's so many moments. What I particularly appreciated of reading the book is just how long it takes to get to actual Hill House. It's like 70 pages, 60, 70 pages, just staying with Eleanor, getting to know her, her relationship with her mother, her sister, and she leaves, she steals the car, and she ends up in this like mill, and she's like looking at this child at the other table, and she's like empathizing with her. There's all these little things like it's I personally I'd say this is like mandatory reading for anyone who wants to do horror of any kind. There's a reason why it's a classic, but because it's for what you both said, like less is more. Not knowing what's behind those doors is scarier than like Bagul or whatever, just like jumping at you or like creepily pointing at you, which can be effective, of course, if done well, but it's not the same. It's not the same. What you can build up in your mind is so much more effective, so much scary, so much more disturbing because it's relatable. Like we've all had it, like you said, Carson. Like there's still days like we're just alone at home, and then just like is there someone else in here? I don't know. Like I'm hearing weird noises in the other room. There's not supposed to be anyone, but like, let me just close the door just for safety. And then it's scarier because you don't want to open it up and know if there's something else behind it. And Shirley Jackson captures it beautifully. But not only that, there's two other things that I want to touch on in this book before diving into the movies, which is first of all the just the ambiguity in terms also of of gaslighting in a way. Because I was reading up, you never know if there's actually ghosts in here because, like, oh, if we go in this in the children's room in the middle, there's this like coldness that just doesn't make sense. But it does make sense, Like it's a weird house the way it's been built up. Like the doors are at a slight angle and they close by themselves and they confuse you. Like it's all made to just bother people by Mister Ukraine, more like huge asshole, just this very nasty man, and the way that the other people like Theodora, Luke, and the professor, the way they relate to Eleanor, it's very patronizing. They're always belittling them. They seem kind, but their kindness comes off as fake. Or maybe it isn't fake, but it's just the way Eleanor is perceiving it. How do you guys feel about this character and just her state of mind, the way she's perceiving and witnessing and experiencing the world surrounding her?
I think she's an idiot. No.
Oh, no.
No, I think it's like you said, those opening 60, 70 pages are such integral moments to building up this character, because obviously you can throw her into this situation and just go, yeah, she's fucking mental. She thinks the house is haunted. It wouldn't work if you didn't know the relationship and the dynamics of what actually brought her there.
No.
That sort of manic need to actually go to the house. You see that a bit in like Flanagan's first episode and such like that. For Jackson's work, it's so important that we really understand why she wants to go there, and the reason, obviously, I'm not going to spoil it, but mainly because I've forgotten. But the whole point of those opening 70 moments is to build up a character that we think is, not unhinged, but really has an ulterior motive.
Yes.
And Jackson really depends on that when it comes to the gaslighting moments, because they are, and it stands out more in the film because that's visualized for us. Robert Wise and Mike Flanagan pinpoint these certain moments that are really the key to unlocking that subculture of gaslighting, essentially. For Jackson's piece, it comes a bit thicker, it comes a bit faster, because it is essentially people just saying, oh, the door's just slamming this place, don't worry about it. Because essentially that is the reasonable conclusion to make. It's not as if they're actively saying, oh yeah, we know there's ghosts, but we're not going to tell you. It comes across as like, they think there's something up, but they are so devoted to believing in something that makes sense. Paranormal hauntings don't make sense. To actually think there is a ghost is a bit nutty. So for Jackson to say essentially that this character is, probably telling the truth and getting gaslighted by Hugh Crane and the rest of them. It's really strong. It's really powerful stuff, and it's really interesting as well because it is the driving force of a lot of the horror in this. It is the sort of primitive nature of horror, where it is just the bumps in the night and the stuff that Universal Horror Pictures would have had on their trailers in the 40s, where it's like, oh, who's behind the curtain? Oh God, it's Bela Lugosi. He's after our paychecks. Something like that's really simple, but it works so well. And to build up a character like Eleanor is really difficult because you walk a really fine line between making this character an extremely effective example of what happens when a culture doesn't believe someone is actually telling the truth. It's kind of like The Boy Who Cried Wolf to an extent, where it's, they know something, so we have just read 60 to 70 pages that side us with her, essentially. To pull us away from that is really difficult, but Jackson is giving it a go, not because she wants us to side with Crane and everybody else, but because it's really important to see that these people haven't spent 60 to 70 pages with her. They don't understand the background, the backstory, her relationship with her mother. That's such a crucial mix there, and for about 100 pages, there's such great content. Sorry, I don't mean to use the word content. It's just kind of like a synonym now for art.
I think
but
it's sticking in my mouth.
Jackson's use of the word content, disgusting. Her actual exploration of Eleanor as a character is really solidified with the relationship with other characters, how they treat her rather than how we would treat Eleanor, because, like I said, we've not spent that much time with her. These characters have spent even less. It all comes to a head, and I think it does so in a way that justifies Eleanor, but at the same time doesn't really reveal that much about whether she was right. And that's the beauty of it. I think it was upon reflection. It's Haunting of Hill House is actually quite an open text. It's quite a very broad end to something that really should have been an open and shut case of ghosts don't exist, get her in the back of the loony van. But,
I think it helps. It's super interesting. The one thing I think the book has naturally that really helps and adds a dimension to this for the reader is, like, you can contextualize and know you're reading a horror novel, right? Like, she does not know she's a character in a horror novel. These people do not know they're characters in a horror novel. And where you can read this and, like, there's definitely a way, right, like, that there's no ghosts and blah, blah, blah. Like, you do have that little bit of, like, expectation and that kind of backup of the spine of, like, oh, I know this is a horror novel. I know, like, it's not just like nothing is happening or like nothing is going to happen or like you're not actively getting gaslit. So I think that really helps like show the gaslighting and make the audience side overall with her in a very natural way, which is a relationship I don't think a lot of novels sadly use, but like I think they should use, because I think that's just natural. You're reading a book, like it works.
I agree. And it's so just tragic and painful the way that she's trying to strike up friendships with these people. She's like, yeah, maybe we can go live together after this experience, because she has nowhere else to go. Like, what's she gonna do? She gonna go back in her dead mom's house, belittled and hated by her sister, whose car she stole? Like, what's she gonna do? It's so it's so sad when it gets to the end. But the other element I wanted to briefly discuss, which is also a good bridge with the film, is the character of Theodora. And it's a character that she's often in analysis of the book, she's often been described as queer coded, as maybe being a lesbian, and it's something that actually the movie explores deeper. And before we get into that, just how do you guys feel about this character, like Theodora, the way she relates to Eleanor, the way there's this like flirtatious friendship between the two of them, but also, like you said, Ewan, some very very mean interactions in here, which are unexpected and such strong gut punches, I think.
Yeah, it is quite, full on, and it is mean spirited at times, and I think the offset of that is to sort of focus up the horror element. Essentially, I do think there is a queer coding to this character, as obviously was explored in the main text adaptation a couple of years ago. It has that nice quality to it that all good character writing has, where it's just another layer where you might not pick up on it the first time you watch it or read it, but as you start analysing the text, you really think, well, this interaction means a lot more than could actually be perceived at the first reading. And I do think that's the reliability of characters like Theodora Crane and the longevity of Shirley Jackson's writing, is that intentional or not, there is a calling there that needs discussing, and it's really well worked. I'm pretty sure Jackson means it. Like it feels too obvious to adapt it to the modern text if it wasn't meant in the actual original, and the effect of that is really, a part of that gaslighting system where you never really know who's on her side. You never really know who's on Eleanor's side to begin with, and seeing her mocked and belittled and mean-spirited interactions with people that usually in a horror film, there's at least one or two characters that would side with the lead and sort of say, hey, maybe there are ghosts in this place.
Not in this book.
Not in this book. Even the people that sort of, it never feels like they genuinely respect her as a character. It always feels as though they are sort of saying, okay, let's just coddle her a bit. Let's just, haha, that's really good. It's like Ringo Starr and the Beatles. It's kind of just like, oh, what a great idea. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put that idea right at the bottom of the pile, and we'll get to it when we get to it. And then they kind of just shuffle her off and lock her in a room where she's like, oh my God, shadow demons are attacking me. And it's like, no. Here's a bit of paper. You write yourself another Yellow Submarine. That's that sort of thing. Shirley Jackson knew what was happening.
So you're saying Eleanor is the Ringo Starr?
She's
Peace
the
and
Ringo
love.
Starr.
Peace and love.
Peace and love, everyone. I want nothing but war and hate for that man. No, I do. I like Ringo in the same sense I like sandwiches. I kind of don't think about them until I need them. As far as its references in the text, though, Eleanor is a character that is probably correct, but nobody is willing to give her the time of day because what she's saying is just so beyond the pale. And I do think it lends itself well to the fact that nobody believes her, nobody actually really trusts her that much. And it's like you said as well, Nick, she's so desperate to stay there because what else has she got afterwards? So it's rather telling that the worst case scenario she is having is living in a haunted house with people that hate her, yet she's so desperately trying to cling to that. It says a lot about the text, and I think Jackson's writing is responsible for it solely. I think that's one of the things that you can't escape with all the adaptations of Hill House, because I didn't realise there'd been so bloody many of them. I'm sure we'll get onto that in a moment, though.
Yes. Carson, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the queer codedness is really well done. Remember, this is 1959, though. Like, literature is weirdly, like, I think largely had a pass with like things about representation, like being able to have representation a little bit more clearly. But like, it is 1959. Clearly, there's a reason it's coded, but I think that adds to the thematic depth of it. I think it's really worthy, especially when you look at like the meanness on display throughout the text. It's not just like this character's mean, like there's more to it. And if you look at that specifically from like a queer perspective about queer survival, I think that's really worthy. It's something I like being a little bit more hidden. It doesn't define the text, but it does largely define that character, which I think is a really great balance to have. I really appreciate it. I think it works well, and I think it adds just like more depth, adds more purpose to the text, adds more, layers to the interactions. This is a very smart novel. It's not just trying to have like a bunch of scares or like creep you out. It also is having like trying to have legitimate conversations, which I think is very nice to see.
Yeah, it's a real work of art. And what I really appreciated as well about the fact that maybe or maybe not Theodore is a lesbian is that it builds on this idea of the house of Hill House being this place that's just feeding on people's insecurities and demons, and the way she kind of lashes out at Eleanor throughout the book. The more time they spend together, it becomes a very psychological battle that's more frightening probably than any ghostly interaction they might have in their time there, which segues nicely into the 1963 film by Robert Wise, most famously known as directing everyone's favorite musical, West Side Story. I know I'm a big fan of the OG West Side Story.
No, that's shite.
Other people here are not. But, this film starring Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, and Russ Tambling, speaking of West Side Story, and also Twin Peaks, my favorite man, Russ Tambling, Dr. Jacoby. This adaptation was a truly important piece of horror cinema for the decade. And not only because it's a very faithful adaptation, like watching it right after reading the book, I was like, damn, this is the book with some minimal changes that I actually really appreciate, and we'll get into those. Um, But what I love about this film is that it came out 2 years after The Innocents, which is the adaptation, the most, we could say the most important adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, which is also a brilliant film. If you listeners haven't watched it yet, just absolutely do. But that film is a bit more classical in the way it's put together. The way Robert Wise shoots this film and just uses camera, lighting, and performances, and just set design and everything, it's a thing of utter beauty for me. Carson, what do you think about this adaptation, this film? Was it your first time watching it? This was my second time.
This is my first
Um,
time.
really?
Um, I thought it was genius. I mean, I think the book is
Really?
strong, obviously, as we said, but I think, as I mentioned, like horror literature, it's hard to create a visceral reaction. I think this movie's the realization of the ideas in the books, like incredibly well when it comes to terror. Like the
Mm,
scene when there's the writing on the wall and she just like breaks down, like, it knows my name, it knows my name. Like, that is such a terrifying idea. And to get those grounded, believable moments of horror, like, this is so scary. I've been doing Hooptober and watching a bunch of horror movies, obviously. This is scarier than like anything I've seen there. Not because of jump
yes.
scares, not because, oh, there's a lot of loud bangs that catch you off guard. No, it's just like genuinely terrifying from like just an idea. Like, the ideas are just disturbing. It's fantastic. I think this is a great adaptation. It's one of those I think works so well with what the book was going for. Like,
Mhm.
no notes, fantastic. Wise, this and Sound of Music, you're not terrible. You're not terrible out there.
He did good. He did good. How about you, Ewan?
It's obviously, like you said in the intro there, Robert Wise did West Side Story. I couldn't care less for West Side Story. He also did Sound of Music. Fine, it's an alright movie. Now, where I can't just brush off Sound of Music is pretty good.
Yeah, let's say
But
it. Let's say it.
where I found a real love for Robert Wise, and surprisingly so, was in his horror films. Like back end of last year, I watched The Andromeda Strain and The Body Snatcher, which are
Mm.
really solid. So I'd kind of written off Robert Wise as, an all right director. He did some pretty good films, some pretty big films. Obviously, his legacy outlasted his abilities on the screen. Until I watched The Haunting, which I think The Haunting is one of the best films ever made. I think it's incredible what it does for the genre and what it does for the 60s in film. Unbelievable. I think it's stunning. I've not felt like that about a film in that long, that it was just kind of a shock to the system. Um, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I think it's a real understanding of the text. I think it adapts it really well, but it expands on it nicely as well. Where, you know, it's very easy to take it's a haunted house as a storyline, but to
Mhm.
develop that is really difficult because there are only so many places you can go, as Eddie Murphy once found. There are only so many places you can take a haunted house. Um, so successfully and rightly so, he focuses in on the relationship, the dynamic with Julie Harris and Claire Bloom and everybody that's in it, and what he gets is a real solid understanding of not just what Shirley Jackson was trying to do, but also the layers that followed the ambivalence of a haunted house, what really goes on behind the scenes. And I think it loses its way a tiny bit in the third act, but that's fine because the 2 acts before are stunning. I think
No?
it's such a character driven piece, and it at times forgets that it's actually a horror movie. I think at times it forgets that it's actually in a haunted house. It becomes a really nice psychological thriller. I think Robert Wise's framing is beautiful. I think in the opening when she falls down the stairs and the camera pans up and it's next, it's unbelievable. It made me feel good. Obviously, it's quite a horrible film, but it made me feel good. Um, no, what was the question? I don't know. It was just a brilliant film. I
Just
absolutely
thoughts.
loved it. I watched it at the start of the month and I just thought that's absolutely like the best thing I'll see this month.
Oh man,
And then I watched Zombie Ass, Fart of the Dead,
was it
which
better
was
than this?
not quite, not quite. I don't think
Please.
it was going to be any better than that. No, I think The Hauntings is the best film for me this month. Absolutely unbelievable, blown away by it. Can't think of many other films that have done that. Considering I was going and expecting just kind of a horror film, like a generic kind of 60s one. If you dig down deep enough in 60s horror, you get like a real sheen of ambivalence and complete mundanity.
Mhm.
But No, the haunting feels it's the same feeling I had when I first went to Detour like 2 years ago, which is such a strange comparison. They've got nothing in common.
That was
It was just that feeling that I had when I watched it. Just kind of
okay.
this is special.
I,
I'm
I,
not trying to implicate Detour as anything to do with Haunted House. Not a thing to do with it. Taxi drivers and fucking
that's
Haunted
a
House.
feature waiting
Different
to
things.
happen. Just comparing the two.
It is, without a doubt.
No, this makes me so happy. I'm just glowing right now after listening to you two, because I love this movie. I don't want to say I love this movie back when I watched it. I first saw it in 2017. I want to say, um, and I really liked it, but I didn't love it, and yet it is one of those films that just stuck with me, like visually, but especially thematically. And we mentioned Robert Wise a lot, rightfully so, because he did a banger job in here. But also, I want to give credit to the screenwriter here, Nelson Gidding. And I was reading that Nelson Gidding actually, he interviewed at a meeting with Shirley Jackson, because she was still alive when the movie was being made, when he was writing the screenplay. And she said to him, like, to me, the Haunting of Hill House is a haunted house story. It is a supernatural book. And Gidding was like, you know what? Yeah, but I don't really see that. I see this as being more psychological. I see it as being, something more than just, these things are actually happening. And I think the level of ambiguity and of fear that's present in the book is tenfold in the film, because almost pretty much everything that happens in here that's scary can actually be, rationalized in some way or another. It's like even the one of very few jump scares in here, if not the only jump scare towards the end, where there's holy shit, you're actually seeing a ghost. Oh no, it's not actually a ghost. It's that person that just got lost in the house. How did she get lost? Was the ghostly spirit of Ukraine just corrupting her? No, maybe she just got lost because it's a messed up house. It's poorly built. It's put together to confuse people when they enter it. So it constantly toys with you, and the way the camera moves, this was a huge influence. Like reading this back in the day, I was like, holy shit, this makes total sense. This was a huge influence on Sam Raimi of all people. And it's like, yeah, I can see that. The way the camera moves occasionally, and the Dutch angles, and the very economic way of conveying scares. It's right up his alley. Right up his alley. There's this one shot of a door breathing, which is just stuck in my mind since I first watched this film. And that's like, I can see Sam Raimi going like, holy shit, I want that in one of my movies. And he did it in, I want to say, the first Evil Dead. But just like, oh, it's spectacular, spectacular. But how do you guys feel that this film improves upon the book? Because the only key change for me, that I appreciated, is that the third act is a bit shaky, I want to say, in the book as well. In the book, primarily because there's this new couple of characters that's introduced, which we didn't mention. It's the wife of the professor with, I don't know, a lackey, like someone just following her around, like a protege or whatever. And she's obsessed with the paranormal, and she's excited to spend a few days in the house because, oh my god, this is when I can get loose and free and just indulge in my hobby of the supernatural and doing tests and stuff. And it is a bit of comic relief, not necessarily needed in a story like that. I can see why Jackson put her there, but it kind of drags down the narrative a little bit. It's something we all looked past, of course, but I appreciate that character of the wife is completely changed in this film, and there's no protege and there's no humor about that. But what did you guys feel worked really well in here, in kind of like the translation and the way that Wise changed or simply visualized certain elements?
I think for me, a lot of it is kind of, a lot of adaptations are very respectful of the source material to the point where the kind of what they're changing is in good faith, but to the point where it didn't really make sense. It's a change that's made to stand out from the original, but at the same time is such a change that it really changed the concept. Robert Wise is not afraid here to just cut what he doesn't think works. He takes one look at it and just thinks, we don't need 60 to 70 pages with Eleanor. We can just cut right to the house. We can just get there, get going. And the change there is that it's just a later reveal, really. It's like, oh, I have no home, I have no car, it's not even mine. That's such a nice switch. And I think for people that hadn't read the book, it's going to be that much more impactful. One of the big things for me, though, is when Rob Wise sees a line or even a narration that he likes he just keeps it in. The opening of this film being just constant narration with sort of the background. It gives a 5-minute setup of this is why the house is haunted. That's all you need. You don't need an hour, Mr. Flanagan. What you need is 5 minutes and some good choreography. For me, it really helps that, like you said, Nick, it's that focus on the psychological element. It's not something that's as keenly touched on in Jackson's work. It's there are elements of it, but how much of that is us projecting onto it, how much of it is actually there, I don't know. For the haunting, it's definitely there. I think it's an active choice to make these characters really suspicious of Eleanor and be like, what the fuck is she talking about? There's just some creaky doors. Settle down. Which I really like. And obviously the big reveal at the end is superb. But I think what helps, and is kind of the detractor for a lot of adaptations, is the visualization of the piece. I think the staircase in particular, the final third centers on that staircase, which, you know, when you think of the big set pieces in history of film, you don't think a staircase being a bit creaky is one of the most haunted aspects of horror, but here it is, and it's done so well.
Nail biting.
It's stunning. I think that's the one thing he gets right, is that the atmosphere is there. I think a lot of early horror in the 60s did that quite well. I think a lot of it depends on Wise being just this amazing visualizer. He does so well to really, I mean, a lot of horror now, I don't want to generalize, but it is just pretty static camera work. It's pretty, I mean, I just watched Halloween Ends, so I'm judging it a lot for that. Which was
movie of the
rough,
year,
to say
you
the
mean?
least. Yes, I'm so sorry. It's in the top 250 of films that released called Halloween Ends this year. No, I think it's really, it's a real struggle to see that horror is kind of marked down as just a pit of scares at this point, where the camera doesn't really matter, the characters are all just there to be killed. Robert Wise is having none of that. He really does take care and time and effort into building these characters, because, you know, I don't want to spoil it too much. Nobody really dies in this, did he? Not particularly. I think that's the strongest part of The Haunting, is that no major character comes to a grisly end. The grisly end is actually the interactions between them. It's essentially like a Stockholm syndrome of having so many people live in an unknown area for so long, looking for something that might not even exist. And it's rather telling that the big climax, well, you know, apart from Eleanor crashing into a fucking tree, but, you know, other than that, there's
And
nothing
dying.
really like. Well, yeah, we all have our foibles, but it's one of those films that's kind of like, there's a real element of suspense to it, and you're never quite sure why, because I think Wise is in on it. I don't think he believes that the paranormal was actually there. I think it's rather telling that by the end, you know, when Crane and Eleanor are up in the attic and the face appears at the window, it's like his wife or something. I think that's really good. I think there's an explanation to paranormal hauntings and sightings. You know, for a lot of the stories I write at work are people seeing like Jesus in a cup of coffee, or like a ghostly figure behind the daughter in a photograph, and usually it is just Photoshop. I'm not saying that, you know, that's the explanation for it in The Haunting, but there is always an explanation to paranormal activities. Wise challenges that, but then falls for it himself when he kills off Eleanor, which I think is just a great contrast. I think it's really intensely done, where he spent an hour and 30 minutes saying, there's no such thing as ghosts. This house is merely just in need of a good renovation work. And then 2 minutes after saying that, the lead crashes into a tree. I think it's quite well done.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I think the biggest thing, yes, there are some changes I think that are rather strong, but like that terror, that sense of stress, that sense of tension, it's the same I got from the book. Why shows just like an incredible amount of faith in the novel. It's very clear that when he was reading the novel, like he saw the visuals he put in this movie. Like he clearly like has just a confidence in the story, a confidence in those subtle elements, a confidence in just like that terror and that debate of is there ghosts here or not. And I think that confidence really shines through to where, like, yes, there are some changes, but this is the book. And I do like that they don't play ignorant towards the language of the book, as you mentioned, with the narration. This is not trying to hide the parts of the book or like change it. This is just trying to like enhance the book in some ways with some of the changes, but really just embrace what made that work special, which I think should be the point of most adaptations, unless you're adapting something shitty, maybe like Bones and all. I think that you should be willing to just like have confidence in like find the magic that was there and not necessarily feel like you need to change that. So I think it works incredibly well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a true work of adaptation. You know, it's taking it and doing something that's still thematically the same, but also very much its own thing. And I think it's a stunning film, just just beautifully put together and beautifully acted. That's what shocked me the most rewatching. I was like, holy shit! I love the casting here, but especially Julie Harris as Eleanor. Whew, like you feel all of her pain, all of the inner turmoil in here that she's going through. She's so likable, she's so sympathetic, and when she's just losing her mind with everything that's happening, like you really do feel that this place is bringing out the worst in people. And I find it interesting that, that some people, like you mentioned, Ewan, like during the pandemic, they watched the Netflix show. But also just even this story, like in terms of isolation, this could make for an interesting double feature actually with Kubrick's The Shining. You know, stories of people just stuck in one place together, just going insane. Is this actually happening? Doesn't really matter because you're losing your mind. And and this, there's so much psychological depth to all of the interactions in here, especially the way, like we briefly mentioned, like the way the character of Theodora is further developed in, you know, quite a lot of, you know, moments in here that just allude at her being probably queer in some way. Like the thing that's like, there's this one quote that she says, like, oh, what makes you scared the most is like, oh, of like accepting what I want, or like making known what I really like, or something along those lines. But there's all those moments that reveal just, you know, there's something behind her and she's keeping it hidden. The same way with Luke as well. I think Luke in the book is very much an entitled asshole and snob, but Russ Tamblyn brings such a likable charm to him, which is easier to get behind. Very joyful, very energetic, but also, you know, still a bit of an ass, still a bit of a rich brat. But there's more to him, and even the professor, who's in both versions, I would say, is probably my least favorite character. There's less things to him outside of simply being someone who's exploiting these people, because it keeps it a secret at first, of like the house is haunted and the entire history, like he slowly reveals it as the narrative goes on. But you really do feel like, yeah, like, you know, you're just doing this for science, but at what cost? And even when he has a bit of guilt, a bit of remorse, like, what am I doing to these poor people? Like, I can tell Eleanor is not doing well, like I should just send her home, but then doesn't. He's like, yeah, I should do this. But there's time, you know. Maybe a couple of days. Maybe we'll pass. Who knows? Who knows? Up until it's too late. It's way too late, and you know the house has done its ghostly magic, and you know it's such a bitter ending in both versions. Doesn't give me joy in any way. I don't know how you guys feel actually about the ending. We haven't really touched on it outside of Ewan's comment. Like Carson, what do you think of this ending? Like, what does it leave you with?
I like it. I mean, it's not necessarily the most you know, let's say satisfying. I don't know about satisfying, but like it's not a very, as you mentioned, happy ending. Let's say it's not very like wrap it up, all our friends are gonna go like skip down the yellow brick road happy forever. But like I think it really works. I think it plays well into like the thematic conversations the book has built up to that point. I think I don't think every story needs to end really happy or really, let's say, satisfying or clean or anything. Like
Hmm.
especially in a novel that's supposed to create themes of dread or feelings of dread and emotions of like sorrow and tension and uncomfortableness. Like I'm okay with the book and the story and movie ending how it does. I think it plays well. I think in a different text it would be a disaster. I think in this text it works.
I will also say, in a very weird, messed up way, it's probably the best ending for Eleanor, because everything that might have happened afterward would have just wrecked her even more. Maybe she would might have been put in an asylum. Who knows? So, you know, by dying there in Hill House, she becomes part of its history, of its tragic history. But you know, the fact that she will forever be remembered for that, at least she will
Yeah,
be remembered for something. You know, it's
it's why
such
I
a.
stopped learning how to drive, is just in case I'm invited to a haunted house and have to go home. You know, I don't want to be part of history. Well, I do, but not for being in a haunted house.
What if the ghosts possess you and they make you drive the car?
I,
It's like a NASCAR driver ghost.
you know what? If I got possessed by ghosts and got put behind the wheel of a car, I'd be quite upset. I'd be pretty angry.
I think
I
I'll
didn't
trust the
give you
ghosts
consent.
more. Peace and love.
That Ringo Starr's ghost is going to haunt me. I'm going to become
jeez.
the world's best drummer. Not again.
Oh man, but yes, 1963 is The Haunting, a massive success. Something that cannot be said for the 1996 version, which is something we'll very briefly go over. This let's call it extra homework, just because it's fun
Yeah.
to kind of tackle all of this. I know, Carson, you haven't been able to watch this, right? Bless you, bless your
Yeah.
heart. Just lucky lad, lucky lad.
Possibly by
Um,
choice.
just fair point, man, fair play. Like, you did good. The most interesting thing about this film is the history behind it. We'll be briefly go into. Basically, Steven Spielberg met with Stephen King. They wanted to collaborate. They were like, we could do a remake of something. We can do something, a new adaptation or something. Like, hey, we haunted houses, we love haunted houses. Hey, we love Shirley Jackson, we also love Robert Wise. Let's do a remake of The Haunting. Stephen King proposed a draft. They didn't like it. They were like, fuck off, Stephen King. We don't like you anymore. And so he left and actually ended up developing and changing his draft for The Haunting into an actual miniseries called Red Rose, which is an original piece of work by Stephen King for television. In 2002 it came out. I managed to find a copy online. I really want to watch it because it looks interesting, actually, as a way to kind of expand and develop The Haunting of Hill House book into something more. Uh, but then for some reason, Steven Spielberg was like, let's get this first time screenwriter to write the script. And Jan de Bont, you just did Twister. Let's come on board, just direct this film. They got Liam Neeson, Lily Taylor, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and of course everyone's favorite actor Owen Wilson to star in this film. And we got The Haunting 1999. Ewan, from 1 to 10, how hard does this film suck?
One, it's lovely. It's a brilliant film. I'd not seen this in years. Like, I forgot I'd watched this. To the point where I've watched it again and I don't remember watching it still.
Yeah.
It's like this mega Mandela effect. Like I said before we started recording, it's kind of like I remember watching Scooby-Doo, and for some reason, again, it's going to be a weird comparison like the Detour was for The Haunting, but I remember Scooby-Doo, I remember the remake of The Island of Dr. Moreau, and I remember this, which I've already forgotten the name of, which kind of goes a long way in telling you how much I remember it. I just remember Owen Wilson getting killed off, and I can't think of another film that's actually killed him off. Maybe Cars 3.
Anaconda.
But other than that, oh yeah.
I think he had
It
like
really,
2 or 3
yeah.
movies, like one after the other, in the late 90s where he dies. It's like the only movies where he loses his. I think there was like a review on Letterboxd where they were like, "This is like an unholy trilogy of movies where Owen Wilson dies in the late 90s."
It's a really strange film because at the very core of it is obviously it's the late 90s. It's the horror genre in the late 90s, so obviously it's going to be. And then Liam Neeson has to get married to the woman that survives with him. And that's it, basically. There's a real weird romance at the heart of it. And they're like, "Oh, don't go in Hill House anymore." It's like, yeah, after that, I don't think I will be going back to Hill House. Thanks for that, Liam. I think it's just such a strange one because it just gets the tone all wrong. The whole point of Shirley Jackson's work and the whole point of the Robert Wise work is that there might be spirits. There is no confirmation of it. And again, we'll get onto it, but it's why I dislike the Flanagan piece so much. It's you cannot confirm or deny whether or not there are spirits in that house because it removes the whole point of the text. It removes the whole gaslighting element. It removes the character relations and it turns them into just very plodding, unessential pieces. Obviously, The Haunting from '99 does that a bit more than Flanagan does. I don't know why. I don't know why Jan de Bont directed this out of anybody. But what you get essentially is a really horrendous horror film, which, to be fair, at the time and the years that followed, isn't that much of a surprise. You've got the Resident Evil films, you've got all these horrible adaptations. If anything, The Haunting is probably one of the most original 90s horrors, just through sheer willpower alone, because of how it's like, I don't get it. Like, Shirley Jackson's original is like, oh, people say horrible things to people that might be telling the truth. 1999 rolls around, it's like, there were child labour factories on this plot of land. It's like, excuse me? When does that come in? It's like, all right, I guess, but it doesn't make much sense. And then Liam Neeson goes, don't anger the spirits. And Owen Wilson goes, I'm going to anger the spirits. And then he gets his head cut off.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
He actually says it,
bad
Carson.
thing.
He says it multiple times.
Maybe I
That's
do
his
regret
last
not
words,
saying
yeah.
this. Maybe this
He
sounds
just-
baller.
Carson, this movie just has Eleanor connected to the history of the house. Like Ukraine is a massive portrait. Like there's a massive portrait of Ukraine, the builder and creator of Hill House, and inside the portrait there's like this ghostly spirit of him who's feeding on the dead children that have gone and died inside the house. And Eleanor is actually the granddaughter of Ukraine, and she was meant to come back to Hill House. And there's this massive fight with this giant CGI ghost in the ending, and the house is collapsing. Like, to me, The Haunting 1999 is everything wrong with big budget mainstream Hollywood horror movies. Even though I do like, The Conjuring 1 and 2 especially, but like, there is this element of just, horror movie has to be bombastic and big and loud. And it's like, no, just no. Maybe other movies, sure, but not an adaptation of a Shirley Jackson novel. Like, what were they thinking? I don't know. It's just overproduced garbage. There's like if like think about the beauty of the sets in the 1963 version. Like they're so richly detailed and gothic. It's like, oh, it's just beautiful to look at. The 1999 one is just so overly just detailed. There's just there's like ghostly faces of children everywhere, like everywhere, just staring down at you from the bedpost when you go to sleep. It's like, 50 creepy children heads. Like, this, what the fuck's happening here? I don't, and they go, and there's the giant staircase. It's, of course, in the book, there's Luke who goes up the staircase. It's a bit crickety, but they manage to get Eleanor and leave. Oh, not in this movie. In this movie, the staircase is massive and it starts falling down, and Liam Neeson has to jump like a video game character 5 different times. It's like, why? Just why?
It is straight up Luigi's Mansion bullshit. Like, so much of that is just like, you can see a man in a blue plumbing outfit going around with a vacuum in the background. It's just so dumb. Like, Nick's touched on everything there, from Liam Neeson jumping around like he does in Taken 3 to Owen Wilson going, oh wow, and then getting like assaulted by a ghost. It's just such mesmerizing stuff, and it really it does say a lot about the sort of state of the genre at the time. And I can think of very few examples following that has improved the genre. I think we're still in that spot of real bad stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's been 23 years and we've not had a good horror film since. Maybe Doctor Sleep. Doctor Sleep was all right.
Oh,
we
Dr.
did.
Sleep.
We peaked at Dawn of the Dead, and everybody's been chasing that heist since.
Romero's or Snyder's?
Romero's. Oh God, not Snyder's.
For a second, I was
Jesus.
like, "Whoa, yeah, I can get behind
Can
that."
I just say, I've now seen every Zack Snyder film, and I cannot think of one good Zack Snyder film.
Watch
apart
yourself.
from the one about the owls. The owls were the
the
Ghoul
owls
owls.
of Ghoul.
They were good. The owls of Ghoul, they were really good because they've got an Xbox game for it as well.
What are you
his
talking about?
nemesis.
Zack Snyder, the Snyder Cut has the best scene in all of cinema, according to the Academy Awards. So,
Well,
put some respect on his name.
I mean,
Wish
there's
I
a
could
lot
have
we can
voted for
say
that.
about the Academy Awards, but I mean, they did give Green Book Best Picture, so
And they snubbed The Haunting. We went to the Razzies. What a shame.
I can't believe it. I mean, I know Lee Wannell and Mike Flanagan might take issue with negative criticism, but the Razzies, really?
Man,
God.
like, Carson, this movie is so bad that Steven Spielberg removed his name from the credits as a producer. It was like, I don't want to appear in any of the promotional material. Remove me from the credits.
And he kept his name on like 1941 or whatever that was. Jesus.
I love that DreamWorks released it of all people. 2 years later, they're doing Shrek.
But they picked themselves up, we could say. After
Yeah, I mean, they did the Haunting, and the board, I assume, had a meeting where they went, right, lads, let's rally round, let's really think about this. Do we want to keep casting Owen Wilson in films? And everybody went, no. And they went, right, we need a serious actor. So they went, let's get Mike Myers. and that was history was made.
Let's send him to Cannes.
Yes.
Dress
Oh,
him
man.
up, paint him green, and send him there. Drop him in with a parachute. Go on, lads. Get the fat suit on him. Get him painted green. Throw him on the ground.
Should have done it for the Emoji Movie. I think didn't they do that actually, like parachuting T.J. Miller or some
No.
bullshit like that. They did some weird stunts for the Emoji Movie. I was
They
like,
should have done that. I don't know if this is a bit of a niche reference, but Tom and Jerry: The Fast and the Furry from 2005 has a scene where an old grandmother and her dog are parachuting down to the ground, and she pulls the parachute cord, and just a packed lunch flies out of it. They should have done that with T.J. Miller. Just strap him into a parachute, shove him out of plane. He opens it. It's like a chocolate mousse throws out of his parachute, just slaps the ground.
squash,
I
splat.
don't like T.J. Miller.
No,
No-
I
no
think
one
you're
likes it.
justified there.
Oh, I gotta love T.J. Miller. But like everyone was like, "Hey, Deadpool 3 is coming out. That's amazing." And T.J. Miller is like, "Well, here's why I wasn't invited. Actually, and, Ryan Reynolds." I was like, no one asked.
I'll tell you
No
why
one
you weren't
forgot you were in
invited,
those movies.
TJ. It's because your last performance in Underwater was shit.
Underwater
And
is a good
also
film,
because
though. Is
is it?
the I like that. Oh
I
no,
went, to be fair, I watched that in the cinema, and about 20 different times the two people next to me were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've got to get up." It's like, do you have IBS? What is the problem? What's the matter with you?
it was too
And
spooky. Too
they were
spooky for
just like,
them.
"No, we just don't like the film. We're getting more popcorn." It's like, right, okay, I might do the same actually.
I need to rewatch it. That's all I'll say.
I'd say it's an uncut gem, but also I'm a sucker for Cthulhu stealth Cthulhu movies.
I love
So
stealth Cthulhu movies. I
that's
still get really
wonderful.
scared by I think Vincent Cassel in that film. Not to go hugely off topic, but it's a great film. It's no Owen Wilson in The Haunting. So
They could have used some more
wow,
Owen Wilson in Underwater.
Yeah?
Just
he should have
dying.
played T.J. Miller's character.
Should have played T.J. Miller's character.
Owen Wilson should have just been cast as every role in Mike Flanagan's
They
Haunting.
should
To be
do
honest.
All the Money in the World where they have Christopher Plummer and just put Owen Wilson instead of TJ Miller and all of his.
Yes, yes. It's glorious
I thought
recast.
you were going to say have all the money in the world, but have Owen Wilson as Christopher Plummer's character. It's like that changes it quite a bit.
And
I'm
double
all
V
for it.
edit.
I
At
will be
least it
there
wouldn't
though.
be as boring.
Well, he's I don't know how you guys feel about the Loki show, but I quite liked him in that.
He's good
Owen
in
Wilson.
it.
It's I'd say it's a
Wow.
comeback, maybe.
What a yeah. To be fair, it's like there are a few actors I can think deserve a comeback. Owen Wilson being back in the mainstream is just delightful. I want him to pocket all that Disney cash and fund Cars 4 himself.
Cars 4,
He's
come on,
animate-
guys.
He's going to animate it with the little toys that they made, and he's like, "Oh wow!"
It's
Just
like
straight to
crashing them into each other. It's like, ooh.
Owen Wilson as Paul Newman as Doc Hudson. Fantastic.
Never forget when Cars 3, the teaser trailer was just Owen Wilson graphically like dying on screen in slow motion, fully serious.
This time it's dark. It's like, oh,
Every time I
man.
would go, kids would cry to it because it's just Lightning McQueen like brutally getting into a wreck and dying. It was a lot.
Speaking of actually haunted house and stuff, he's the lead in the new one, the new Disney one. So
I will
Is
be
he
sad.
actually?
he is actually.
Oh no.
Sorry, no, he plays Kent, a priest. That's all there is on the description.
Oh
Him and
no.
Um,
Jared Leto is in that.
Oh god, am I gonna love it? Wait.
Lakeith
He plays-
Stanfield, Rosario Dawson, Jamie Lee Curtis, Danny DeVito, and Tiffany Haddish as well. What?
Winona Ryder.
Jamie
is
Lee
also
Curtis.
in it.
Dan Levi.
Maybe that's
I
why
like
she wasn't
how-
in Halloween Ends really. She was filming that.
This is a Halloween film, and Disney have gone, all right, we've got a Halloween film. It's literally called Haunted House. When should we release it? And they've all gone, March. Right, thanks. Brilliant. Okay.
It's the best
They're
time of the
releasing
year,
this in August 11th.
Oh, sorry, it was previously scheduled for March, but I assume they
Oh.
thought, well,
But
that's
they
silly.
kind of realize,
It's
like,
a
It's
Halloween film in March.
August. That's better.
oh man.
Speaking of better, not The Haunting of Hill House.
Maybe we'll
That's-
see. We'll see. Released in 2018 on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House, which is I kind of find it funny that the other two adaptations are just The Haunting, because I guess like I, I want to say actually maybe for both adaptations, because I know for the 1999 version that was the case, but also I think for the 1963 version there was the movie House on Haunted Hill that had come out by William Castle and the remake in the late 90s. They were like, people will be too confused by that, just call it The Haunting. But that's not the case with the 2018. not even remake, but just reimagining by Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan, better known for directing Doctor Sleep, Oculus, uh, uh, Ash, we could say, and also the Midnight Mass Netflix show, which is I really like that one. But The Haunting of Hill House basically takes Shirley Jackson's novel as a jumping off point for something completely different. Thematically, maybe the same. Who knows? We'll see. Some comments have already been said about it, so don't have me too hopeful. But it's basically, instead of being about these people doing a paranormal experiment and investigation in this haunted mansion, this is an intergenerational time jumping story of a family of five siblings, a father and a mother. They were young, the late 80s, I want to say, I think, like for the times right, like in the late 80s, early 90s. They were renovating multiple houses and living in them. And this time, hey, we're spending the summer in Hill House. But there's spooky ghosts around, the mother goes crazy. Who knows why? She kills herself. The father leaves. The children all grow up to have different types of trauma from the experience. And sadly, one of them, Eleanor, the youngest daughter, also whose twin is Luke. There's a lot of connections with the names. Some of them match, some of them don't, but whatever. Um, the youngest daughter also dies, and this new death in the family kind of brings these children together to kind of process their trauma and maybe uncover the deep secret of Hill House. Carson, what are your thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House? Was this your first time watching it or no?
No, this is my second go around.
Oh,
I will start out by saying, love Mike Flanagan. I think he's
okay.
very talented. I think that Netflix brings out his worst traits.
Oh,
I've only seen this. I saw this when it released and saw it now, and I saw half of Bly Manor and I turned it off, and I've not seen his other shows. I
it's
think
fair for Bly
cinematically with
Manor.
like features, great talent. Netflix has him like, I don't know what it is, but something about these series just don't really work for me. I remember
Hmm.
liking this back when it first released, but this time around I was so bored by this. Gotta be honest, guys. I think the structure is like crazy ineffective. It
Hmm.
throws you in the middle of this, and I think it's really rather hard to follow or engage with. I think there's no reason this needs to be 10 episodes. This really feels like they are stretching this, and the fact that he's doing The Fall from the House of Usher makes me terrified next, because that's a short story with 3 characters, and he just released the cast as we're recording this, and there's 20 different people in that fucking show. What are
Yep.
you doing, Mike? Make that just a film. um but I think like the base of the story is still there as far as emotions, as far as trauma. Technically it's well directed, it's well made. There's obviously some very effective jump scares, but I think it gets to a point where it's just like it doesn't really come together narratively due to the structure. And then it starts to feel like it's putting so much focus on the jump scares and on
Hmm.
little things like hiding demons all around the frame. I remember when this came out, everyone was like, oh, let's
Yes.
break down every frame and see how many demons are hidden. I think it gets so caught up in stuff like that that it tends to lose the focus on like, how do we make this not just an effective story, but an effective adaptation? I mean, this
Hmm.
feels like an original story. I wouldn't even say like this really works as an adaptation at all. It feels completely different. It does. I don't know. It really doesn't work for me. I think it's like a lot, as you mentioned with bombastic horror. I think this is like a tragic example of what this story looks like under this current scope.
Interesting, interesting. Ewan, how about you? Well, this was your first time around, instead, right?
Yeah, this was my first time
Mm.
watching it. It's exactly what Carson said there. It's all about the scope. I also like Mike Flanagan a lot. I think Doctor Sleep was great. To continue on from a Stephen King adaptation about 40 years later and make it a success, that's a bigger deal than most people realized at the time, and I don't think it gets enough credit now. On the other side of that, Netflix do bring out the worst in Mike Flanagan, and this is essentially 10 hours of, you know, trying to readapt Shirley Jackson's work and missing the point of it entirely.
Hmm.
One of my friends who watched all of Blind Manor reviewed it, and I suppose it summarizes what I thought of when I was about 5 episodes deep, and it was, God, I just don't care. Finished it off for the sake of it after about episode 5. And yeah, I think with me miniseries, it's I'm a busy man. I'm not really, but I like to think I am, and I like to you know start to pick my viewing options a little more carefully. By which I mean I just rewatch Peep Show on my phone and
Hey.
occasionally watch films because that is what work demands. If I weren't watching this for a podcast, I probably would have switched off like 4 episodes in.
Mm.
It's I don't think there's anything particularly unique about this, and I only say that because I can now summarize modern horror as either, oh my god, they've used scary red lighting like Possessor or the new Hellraiser or Suspiria, or on the flip side of, it's really grey and moody and it's all a metaphor for family struggles, a la It Follows, anything else Mike Flanagan's done, Halloween, etc. There is no real sort of middle ground for that spectrum where it's like, I think ultimately I just think Haunting a Hill House is really boring. The performance is fine. The direction is fine. It feels really artificial at times. It just feels really clunky in some places, especially in the house and the background shots, like behind the scenes and sort of in the past, essentially. When it's in the 80s, it just feels really like there's no heart in it, which is weird because Mike Flanagan is such a dedicated director. Like you can see that in Doctor Sleep, you can see it in Hush. It just doesn't feel like there's anything here that feels emotionally gratifying. It doesn't feel like there's a justification enough for completely changing the direction of what Shirley Jackson's piece is about. Because, in the opening episode, Ellen is killed off. So really what you're left with is a family drama. You know for a fact that the distant father who's just shown up again isn't going to be around for much longer by the end of the show. You know where the story's going, and I suppose the real upheaval of that is, well, if the performances are good, if the character direction and the assembly is well made, then that's fine. But it's just a collection of characters that have got all the same issues. One of them's getting a divorce, one of them's unsure, one of them doesn't appreciate that their life is being publicized, the usual remit of modern horror tropes, and then they're all stuffed into a mansion for 10 episodes, and it's just not really like interesting. It's got all of the right parts of The Haunting from 62, 63, without any of the payoff that makes it, something that actually challenges the narrative of Shirley Jackson's work, where is the house haunted? Is it not? But Flanagan just says, yeah, the house is haunted. Look, here's 10 episodes of me trying to scare the shit out of you with some doors. And it's, a lot of beauty is lost when you just accept that not the confirmed narrative, but the one that people allude to quite a lot. That's the thing. Shirley Jackson and Robert Wise allude to the idea that the house is haunted, but there's never any specification. Even when Wise shows it in like Eleanor's death at the end, there's no confirmation that, it is a haunted house. Maybe she's just a shit driver. With Flanagan, it's immediately it's just, oh yeah, the house is haunted. These kids were terrified. That's why they don't want to go there. It's like he's using horror as a launch pad for family drama. It's not interesting. I'd never found it myself being like, this is really good, this is intense. Even from a technical perspective, I think modern horror, it's kind of like Midsummer and Hereditary, where it's like, it just feels really cold. It feels like there's no heart to it. There's nothing in there. Even when it's colourful and vibrant and bright, there's nothing there that's like, oh wow, this is really meaningful, this is impactful. It just feels like it's going through the motions a bit. And I don't know, I was expecting a lot more, especially since it's absolutely lauded on Letterboxd, like 4.3 out of 5. That's like Postal territory. That's like that's an excellent film. That's Uwe Boll at his peak levels of territory here. That's not reserved for shitty horror Netflix originals that I'm going to stick on after work. That's for something
Postal deserves.
Postal's too good. It's too good for you or I. Uwe Boll has ascended. Flanagan has not.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked after these two statements. I love this show. I loved The Haunting of Hill House when I watched. I remember I don't like I surprisingly enough now I do consider myself a TV guy. For years I kept avoiding that, but now I'm kind of like, you know what? I've actually seen enough TV shows and I do still watch a lot of them. So, I kind of am a TV guy, but I've never been one of those who's like, actively looking forward to episodes or shows dropping. Oh my god, movies, I have to watch it. Like I've never been I've never been that like that. Except for The Haunting of Hill House. I remember when it was announced it was going to come out on Netflix, like I'd loved Gerald's Game and Hush and even Ouija, Origin of Evil, whatever the prequel movie. It was like I really loved Mike Flanagan, so I was like, you know what, I'm super excited for this. And I'd seen the movie the year prior to this. I was like, I'm looking forward to this. and it's one of very few shows I've actually watched. I want to say the first day it came out, or close to, or the first weekend, and it was, I want to say, like in 4 days, I watched it in its entirety with my mom. We would watch it like after lunch, and then the final episodes we watch at night because she was like, "It's too scary to watch at night." But then she was like, "Ah, well, fine, let's do it." I personally don't consider this to be scary almost at all as a show. It is scary in the more conventional, like you said, mainstream type of way, where it's like it's ghost, spooky ghosts. There's apparitions and creepy crawlies under the bed and whatnot. But it is a bit more conventional in that sense. But what I really love about Mike Flanagan and this approach to just horror throughout his entire career is that it's inherently emotional. And even if his movies sometimes have some of these, tendencies to just jump scares, even though I disagree that they're particularly prevalent in here. I want to say there's like maybe two jump scares, three at most. They're like proper, genuine jump scares. Everything else is a bit more subdued. But what I really like is that he has a strong focus on characters. Like he loves these people so much. Um, and I have to agree though with some of the criticism that you guys said. Like I remember the first 5 episodes were each focused on one of the Crane children, which is also, that's an interesting idea of like, the Crane was not the name of any of the people there, so he takes the name of the founder of the house and he calls them Crane. It's fascinating. But anyway, there's a lot of changes. We can dive into them if we want later, but he focuses on each of the Crane children. So and there's this analysis where every one of the children represents a different state of grief. So you have the older child who's denial, who's writing books about haunted houses, and he started about writing a story of hey, this is what I actually lived through in a Hill House where my mom died, and here's all the crazy shit that happened. And the brothers and sisters hate him for that. Then you have the other sister who's all angry about what happened and angry at her brothers. And the other one's Bargain, the Luke, who's a drug addict, is depression. And then finally you have Nell, Eleanor, and you see how she actually died, maybe killed herself, maybe she was killed by a ghost, who knows? And she's acceptance of death, acceptance of the fate that she's gone through. So I kind of like that. And I was rewatching. I was like, okay. Then there's episode 6, which is the one shot. It goes back and forth, which is brilliantly put together. Hats off for the production design and whatnot. But I was like, fucking hell, there's 4 more episodes. I don't like, what's he gonna do now? And I have to agree. Like the second half of this show is a bit of a slog. It's just like, holy shit, this could have been like 7 episodes long, and just get straight to the chase. 8 episodes at most, but 10 is just gratuitous. That's like self-indulgence to the worst. And I love Mike Flanagan. I love the way he writes, but I forgot about, and it's a trigger word for some people, but the monologues in here. You get to the final episode, it's like, damn son, just cut down on them. I love them, but just monologue every 5 minutes. Same thing that he did in Midnight Mass. Have any of you watched Midnight Mass? Actually, no. Midnight Mass, I think it's probably the best book that Stephen King never wrote. Basically, it's very well put together. But even then, there's entire episodes. There's like I'm going to say like a 20-minute stretch where it's just two people monologuing one after the other. They have great things to say. It's also very tiring to follow. Cannot deny that. Um, but still, I had a good time revisiting this. I really dislike the color palette of his Netflix productions. It's just ugly. I don't know what happened. It looks like someone just puked all over the screen, just like blah, just orange, brownish. I don't know. But as an adaptation, I found it interesting in terms of the comparisons and the connections that it draws. What are some of those connections to the book that kind of stood out to you guys?
I suppose, apart from the obvious, there is a house and it is haunted.
It's
I
called
guess
Hill
that's
House, man.
it is. It's a house on a hill, and it's present. Now, it, sorry, it just sounds like I'm out of breath there because I just don't know where to start. I think for me, the real draw is that I I really respect that Flanagan has made some changes, because you can't just peddle out the same narrative over and over again. I think making them all related is an interesting choice, but that, like I said earlier, leads itself into, it's a family drama with a bit of horror in it. I think some of the illusions that are made are a little strange, but I think some of them do work. Like the staircase, for instance, obviously that's the classic where it's like looming and ever present. The red door, the red room, I think that's interesting as well. I think there's enough in here to separate Flanagan from his contemporaries. I do believe that he's a very good horror director when he's not being asked to stretch a story out to 10 episodes. I think that's a little too much. I think that's like, especially some of the episodes that rock in at like over an hour. Like the more the better, obviously, but I think there has to be a time and a place for how much actually gets added on. Like you said, Nick, there's like one episode per character, and like two of them aren't even that interesting.
Which one did you find interesting?
Oh, it would be easy to say which characters I did find interesting. I think Theodora is probably the most interesting character, just because I think Flanagan accepts sort of the reading of that and just sort of builds on it a lot better. I think I really appreciate that because it is quite interesting.
Yeah.
As
Shout
far
out
as the
to Kate
actual
Siegel, the director's
Kate
wife,
Siegel,
as well.
honestly, fantastic. As far as it actually goes with like the impact of Haunting of Hill House, I could not really find anything different to this than the average horror film that released at the time. It's dark and moody and a bit gritty, a bit like Halloween when that first came out, a bit like Doctor Sleep is as well, where it is dark and it's very grey, and it's almost, I think that's where the lack of heart comes into it, where it's just kind of a bit drab, bit just drawn back, a bit scaled down. And obviously there's a minimalism to that does work for some. For Flanagan, it really doesn't do much. It's kind of, I don't know, I think 10 episodes for this is a bit hefty, a bit difficult for him. It kind of, the big crux for me is that it just misses the point of Jackson's meaning and message. And if you're going to adapt something, then at least do it faithfully. Otherwise, you might as well just be doing something original. For that being said, I think to actually confirm that, it is a haunted house, I just think that removes so much of the mystery and the intrigue and sort of where a plot can go. There's only so far you can take a plot that confirms the existence of the paranormal within its opening moments. I think it's a really strange decision. I think it's a bold decision. I think Flanagan always makes bold decisions with his horror, and I always, I appreciate that. I just think it's such a misfire. It does a real poor job of sort of housing the actual implications of what it would mean for Eleanor to, obviously, if she'd lived past the first episode, being interacting with the horrors of the house, like the bent neck lady. The bent neck lady. How fucking simple a name is that, and how boring is it? Just, it's the bent neck lady. Oh my god, the bent neck lady. It's like a Scooby-Doo villain.
It's like, oh my child made it up,
Zoink Scoob. Like, all that shit. I don't buy into it. It's kind of, I think the problem for me started with It Follows, where it's like, it's just the entity. Or something like Tenet, where it's just the protagonist. Name your characters. Name them something proper. Do something with them. Because the end result is, oh no, she's getting chased by the bent neck lady. And especially with horror, I always think that less is more. Less is really more when you are going to display something horrifying or something like that.
Well, you do have a named character. You have Poppy, the ghost Poppy. It was introduced like 2 episodes from the ending of the show.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a lot of the stuff that is in Flanagan's work is good when it's contained to like 2 hours. For him to make something like 10 hours, it's the big thing that sticks out for me is when they first get together, their conversation is not the death of their sister, but it's like, you're going to publish a book on our experiences. Oh, heavens.
That was a flashback.
Oh, was it? Oh, well, at that point, I'd stopped
It was
listening.
like 5 years before.
30 minutes into the first episode. It never grabbed me. I was never like, I never thought, this is awful, this is terrible. I just kind of, it drifted. Like, it's a solid 2.5 out of 5. It's like, it's kind of just one of those things that I'm not sorry I watched it, because now I can be part of the cultural conversation, which you all know I love to be part of. But at the same time, it's 10 and a bit hours that's like, it's Netflix originals I've never been like convinced on.
Yeah, it's just so nothingness. I think you're right, Nick, when you said, Mike loves these characters. The issue is he just never like took a moment to get the audience to love them also. It just
Mm.
jumps you like immediately into it. And I think like the jumping in time is terrible. I think the period piece part of this film is like fucking horrendous, if I'm being honest. I think with the old house, like I think it's genuinely one of the worst realizations of like, oh, we're gonna do like the 70s or 80s, like I've seen in just content, I
I keep
guess is the word
forgetting
for
it's
it.
set in the past sometimes.
Not only that, but it's like it feels ancient at times. I mean, it feels like it's in the fucking 1930s at times, and then it's like it just doesn't work. It really like fails to. I agree with you, and I think it just fails to engage me. As far as the changes, there are obviously a lot of changes, and I appreciate that you can take bold moves. I just don't get why this is not an original work. Like it doesn't really
Mm,
draw from the old film or the old story that much, and even the bits they do, like it's very frustrating to see like Eleanor's crash, let's say, or the death. And
mhm.
like that's such a big moment in the other text. And here it's just like in and out, doesn't really matter that much. It feels like it's obliged to do it because it's connection to the original story. But also, like, nobody came to this show because they're like, wow, I can't wait to see that haunting adaptation. Nobody who watched this has
I'm
ever
the
even
only one.
heard of the book or movie. So, like, I don't get why you feel you need to connect this to this other story. Just make this an original. It could be a lot better if you're not tied to the like scars of the original or the whatever the original, considering you clearly don't want to make that. And I think Flanagan's always been drawn. I mean, like even Doctor Sleep, love that film, love the extended version. Even
Mm.
like, yeah, there are scenes that you can cut down. He's definitely a filmmaker who doesn't necessarily know like how to get in and out of certain scenes. So like if he's that way in a 2-hour feature, you can watch Doctor Sleep like 4 times in the time it takes to watch the series. Like
The
it's gonna
extended
be
cut as well.
horrendous. It's just yeah, it's just so I agree with you, and it's not terrible. I think like I said, like it's fine, like well made, but it's so nothing that like there's just no reason I would say like you need to watch this. Even the jump scares are just like lazy jump scares, and I appreciate that there are like a ton. You're right, not like he's doing now where he's breaking world records for as many jump scares as you can put in an episode. But like
I've heard it's like a joke. I want to. I don't really care that much for Midnight Club. The new show is just released. Like I'm not hyped for it. I don't know why.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I get what you guys are saying totally. I don't know. I definitely lost something with this compared to the first time watching it. But even then, it still managed to make me emotional at times. But I guess I've always had a bit of an attachment, uh, before elevated horror was elevated horror, those good times when you could have something like The Witch come out and it follows, and it was just a good movie that people liked before it was the A24 aesthetic and it's elevated horror. Like when that happened, like, I love John Carpenter who just shits on people talking about elevated horror. It's like, I guess I know what you're talking about. Who gives a shit? Movie's a movie. Just and I can I don't even know if Mike Flanagan was influenced in some ways by those stories. It is fascinating that this came out the same year as Hereditary, just few months apart, and both tackle grief and trauma in very different ways in terms of graphic content. But the only thing I really disagree with is the fact that there's no real heart in here. I think there is a lot of heart coming from Flanagan, because especially he's never gone too much in depth with it, but he's lived a rough life, you know, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, massive losses, personal losses that have made him grieve in multiple ways, and he's gone through therapy, and he's been sober now, I think 4 years, he said recently on Twitter, 3 years, 4 years. So hats off to him, honestly. And I think it comes through in the show. I agree. There's like the two most boring characters in here of the siblings are the eldest two. Like Game of Thrones guy, Michael Huisman. Just a nothing. Like, I never really liked him even the first time around as a character, as a performer. He's just there. He's just a blank slate. He's just like, I don't believe in ghosts. Fair enough, fine. But he never really injects anything compelling to him. Also, poor woman. Like, I like her in general, but Elizabeth Reeser, as Shirley, who's the owner of the morgue. like all of the story, and she represents anger, fair enough, but also I don't really care about her. What I do really care about is the other siblings. I think especially like this is where everyone, multiple people in the show went on to great things, but especially Oliver Jackson Cohen was a revelation at the time. I remember when this show came out, and I just this man playing a drug addict who's going through withdrawal, who's trying to improve his life. Like to me, is the best performance in the entire show. I don't know how you guys feel about him, or even just your favorite performances. I'm curious about that. But him in this, just rewatching it, whenever he was on screen, and his episodes were the most compelling parts to it. Well, unfortunately, everything with the bent neck lady, and I like the name. It's made up by a child. It makes sense. It's called the bent neck lady. But everything with her and Victoria Pedretti, I remember it being more. That's a problem with a twist. First time around, it's like, holy shit, she was the bent neck lady all along. She's been going through time and kind of forced to see her own death. Ah, the first time, and then second time is like, it's all right, it's fine, it's fine. It doesn't have the same impact as the first time around, even though I still wept during the final monologue that she gives. It's life is all confetti, gotta love the moments in between. There's a lot of good messages, I think, in here, even though it becomes a bit hokey and melodramatic in the final parts, but we'll get to that. Favorite performances? Yeah, I'm curious.
I was gonna say,
Cars.
I love that that's your moment with that scene when I had Netflix at 1.25 speed, like counting down the minutes until it was over. I think Kate Siegel is great here. I mean, I think her arc, like Ewan kind of mentioned, like I think it's the one that survives. It's the one that really builds. It's the one that interests me. Think it's done better in the other adaptations. But I think her performance is good, mainly just because I think like she's the one who gets the most for the audience to invest in, and the most to chew on, and the most to bite, and like the most to work with. But
Even
I
her
think
little
she's
episode
great.
is fascinating, and
Yeah.
she's just investigating because she's a social worker and psychologist. It's just fucking disturbing what it gets into. Without let's not go into it. Yes, if you like Kate Siegel, then I would recommend Midnight Mass because she's phenomenal in that one. Like I think if you like her here, you're gonna love her in that. Um,
I
but
hear
yes,
that one in general is good. I don't know if I believe it, but I hear it's
it's
good.
it's I will say what benefits Midnight Mass compared to The Haunting of Hill House is that it's not 10 episodes long. I would say it's like 7 or 8 episodes tops. Every episode justifies its existence. It is a lot of people talking. Like if a lot of conversations, like if you don't get into those, if you're not able to focus on them completely, it is tiring because it's a lot. It's a lot of people talking. But it has a very engaging mystery, and you really don't know what's going on for a while. And once it's revealed, it gets into very messed up territory, but also very beautiful. And I will say it's shocking. Like, I remember getting halfway through the show and thinking, this would be amazing if it actually ended this way, but I don't think Netflix would ever greenlight it. And then it goes even beyond that. I was like, holy shit. It's actually doing this. So I think it's better than like it's grown on me over a year. I want to rewatch it, but Ewan, your thoughts on character, very performance? Yes, maybe Kate Siegel. Do you second that?
Yeah, you know what? I hate to echo everybody that's just gushed over Kate Siegel, but she is absolutely the best thing. You can kind of tell as well because of her frequent collaborations with Flanagan. They have a relationship on screen together that really Siegel understands what Flanagan's trying to do, even if me personally I didn't care for it in this instance. She's really important to the structure of his work, not through just her presence on screen, but actually understanding the sort of emotional range that is needed for something like this, which is pretty broad considering you've got the usual extent of family drama being, oh my god, grief is horrible, isn't it, everybody? And it's like 10 episodes of, yes, isn't it horrible? But beyond that, the actual horror elements of actually, disposing of and dealing with, hauntings, paranormal activity, she seems like the perfect capsule for it. And yeah, I think that's the best performance in the film, in the show.
It's almost
It
like it's
just,
a 10-hour movie, man. It's a
oh.
real movie in the end.
I think Timothy Hutton's pretty good as well as Hugh Crane. I did like his performance. I think it gets a bit, he as it goes on he gets better. I think starting out he's not the best, but by the end of it he's really strong.
It's a grower because basically he has to play someone who's seen shit. And so at
Yeah,
first when you first see him, he's very, he how do you say when someone repeats words a lot? Someone's always like, da, da, da. And yes,
Someone like me on a
it
podcast, just
stutters. It
same
stutters
thing
a
over.
lot. No. He stutters a lot, and you can see that he's just like in a whole other place with his mind. It's like, what's up with this man? And then when you actually focus on him, and you have the episode that focuses on the way that he perceives the world, it's like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now he wants to do good, and like he's having these fake conversations with his dead wife, which is very touching. But what I also really appreciate is it's not the ghost of his wife. It's literally just his own way of coping with grief. He's just inventing this fictionalized version that kind of scolds him, but also supports him. It's very tender. I found. And yes, actually, we haven't mentioned the wife, Carla Gugino, everyone's favorite character in Spy Kids. I don't know. What did you guys feel about? What did you guys think about her? Because you know, what I found interesting after reading the book and watching the show is that she's more Eleanor from the book than the Eleanor character in the show. Don't you feel like that? Yeah. What did you think of her? And the way, the longer the show goes on, the more things are revealed about her until the penultimate episode where it's just about her and how ultimately why she killed herself, why she was going crazy and all of that. What did you guys think?
It's yeah, I mean Robert Rodriguez really gets the best out of her in Spy Kids. It's a regard, it's a masterclass.
Career
But
best
no,
performance.
in the same sense though, it's Flanagan knows how to get the best out of his actors. That is something that's constant with his work. Carla Greeno is no exception. I think she's very good. I think again, like we said about Hugh Crane as well for this, it's a trust in the long form storytelling process. I might not particularly care for it, but it is really nice to see that there is a dedication to actually holding firm and saying you're going to have to wait a couple more episodes until we get into this.
Hmm.
The obvious detraction from that is the Haunting of Hill House isn't very good, but on the other side, what could have happened is that these characters' long form storytelling, it could have been really invested and interesting. I do think, regardless of the output for me, it is rather striking to see that Flanagan is willing to give them so much time, especially someone like Carla, because you look at that filmography and that is pretty impressive. To cap it off essentially with a really important narrative crux in a 10 series Netflix original is really quite complex. Essentially,
Mm.
it's very difficult to get past her performance being in narrative elevation. Essentially, she does that so well, though. I think she doesn't try and overshadow the whole show. She doesn't try and detract from anybody. She knows the importance of that performance is essentially less is more for her. It's appear in the strongest moments, appear to have the horrors, have the breakdown, essentially have that lingering effect on Hugh Crane and the kids. It's like the opening episode when he's gathering all the kids in the car and they shoot off and she's at the
Mm-hmm.
window. I think just little bits like that are really well worked. It just, if it weren't for like the drab surroundings of it, like when he's like at the door and he's holding the hand, it's like I'm gonna look out there. It's like 5 minutes of just fucking, oh, maybe there is a jump scare coming. It's like there is only one thing worse than a jump scare, and it's the lead up to a jump scare, not actually ending with a jump scare. I think jump scares are
Jump scare
such a
blue balls.
jump scare blue balls. I think jump scares are so terrible. I think what they do is absolutely nothing. There is a difference between being scared and being shocked, and Haunting of Hill House is shocking. It's not scary. If the haunting, I did think that was scary, mainly because I've not seen Russ Tamblyn in anything that wasn't West Side Story or Twin Peaks, and that was
Hey.
revolting.
And he also has a cameo in here.
He does. I always like
I
seeing
clapped when I saw
Russ.
him.
You clapped, applauded. No, I always like seeing Russ Tamblyn pop up in things because he's kind of one of the unsung heroes of film, really, isn't he? He's in all sorts, but he never gets his due diligence.
Yeah.
I suppose that's what happens when he's starring Tom Thumb.
Yeah, Carson, any thoughts on the Carla Gugino?
Yeah,
Marion Crane, I think.
I agree with pretty much everything Ewan said. I think, like, the issue is not the big moments of emotion that these characters get. I think the actors work well. I think the stories, the screenplay works well. It's just like this slog around them. I mean, if to get to a desert oasis, if I have to hike for 3 days in a fucking desert, I'm not going to be very pleased at the palm trees, right? Even if it's cool, like if I just drove there. So like, I just like, I don't know. I think it's too little, too late, but I think it is good. And those are the moments where like the heart, the soul of the book and of the original adaptation, that's where like
Mm-hmm.
start to shine. And you just like, now that I've seen the movie or I've seen the book, I imagine it'd be even more frustrating to watch, because I'd be like, yeah, this is great, this is like, I just wish I did one of those other forms of media rather than sit through 10 hours of this for like a skim milk version of
You
what
know,
it is in those, you know.
you could read the book twice probably instead of watching
Oh,
the
more than
show
twice.
3 times maybe. Yeah. I one thing that I found frustrating watching the show after having read the book, not only which is weird, I don't know why, but like being aware that something is a reference. I don't know if it makes sense for you guys, but there were just moments in here where it was like, oh, the cup of stars. This is a little cup of stars. Like the first time around, that you didn't really catch that, but I haven't read the book. But there's the cup of stars. It's like small little references like that was a bit weird. Making the Dudleys, which are the housekeepers of the mansion, will only stay there after. Will always leave after it's dark because they don't want to spend the night there. They made them very sympathetic, which I can appreciate. Making them a bit more likable. Um, but it gets into very hokey melodramatic territory at the end where it's like that's when I was getting tired of all the monologue. It's like, what the fuck? But I want to talk about the ending in a second. um but what the only thing I found really frustrating is that I don't need to have ghosts in here that speak. I don't need to see the ghost lady who's just from the 1920s being crazy cuckoo and being the villain, but also not really. Like, she's borderline killing everyone basically towards the end, or trying to kill all of them, and then she's just nonchalantly, not even dispatched. It just kind of like, you piss off. It's like, fine, okay, I guess I'm gonna leave. And she just walks off screen. I was like, what's the point of introducing a villainous ghost in the second to last episode? Well, she's never been mentioned before. It's not like you're even building up to that. It's not like she's the Bentley lady who was there in the opening scene of the show. No, you're just building up. It was bizarre. It was honestly just such a bizarre choice. Like, I hope that Mike Flanagan, if he's like, you know what, if I could remake this show now, I would definitely change that. Like, I hope he feels like that, because it's just a terrible decision, I think. Um, but speaking of very weird decisions that I wasn't a fan of, the ending, the final episode, where we learn, the Red Room was actually this place that everyone could access that would just change and give them whatever they wanted, make them happy, but also poison them by staying inside the house longer. And Nell, Eleanor saves all the siblings from dying in their own limbos and nightmares, and gives a nice speech. The father dies because he has to sacrifice himself just to save the children, I guess. I don't know. I lost. I was like, why did you have to die, man? Who knows? Um, and then the weirdest thing, when we actually see what happened the final night, which is the wife Carla Gugino killed the daughter of the housekeepers, which I still think it's a nice twist. The fact that the little child, oh, I'm seeing this girl is Abigail, she's real. It's like, yeah, of course, she's a fucking ghost. And it's like, no, she's a real person. Again, introduced in the final episode, the fact that the housekeepers even have a daughter. But then when you put two and two together, it's like, oh, that's actually a cool twist. I think very tragic, but then it goes into this weird territory where it's like, oh, Ukraine, don't destroy the house, don't do shit, because it's the only way for us to still see our daughter and not process grief in any way. It's very healthy for us, and we'll keep looking at Hill House. And the final moment where just like who the wife, the elderly Mrs. Dudley, she's being rushed into the mansion just so she can die there and become a ghost. It's I don't know about that. I was like, it's a bit too much, Mike. It's a bit too much. How do you guys? Well, I think you guys probably aren't a fan of this ending, but just how do you guys feel about all of these decisions and choices that even I, as someone who likes the show, found baffling rewatching it?
I I think by like episode 7 I clocked out mentally. I was like, yeah, let's just let this wash over me. And
You
that
were
ending
done.
did not surprise me. It was kind of like, yeah, what else is going to happen, really? Let's be fair. It's all a big metaphor for how we grieve and the family unit. It's like, right, thanks for that, Mike. Brilliant. None of it really, even that twist, which was like, fairly decent. It is a surprise, but it's not a surprise for the right reasons. It's a surprise in the sense of, this isn't what Shirley Jackson wrote. If you're going to adapt something, at least streamline it a little bit. I think the whole Red Room thing being like the Heart of Desire, it's just the mirror from the first Harry Potter movie, where they look in the mirror and it's like, oh, I'm a Quidditch captain. It's like, good for you. You're going to die if you look in any further. It's just, I don't know, it just loses something. It's never quite amazing. It's never quite responsible with what it's trying to say. It's like, oh yeah, they're going to grieve, they're going to move on. Right, great. Smash up the house then. Go on. I don't know. I've run out of steam for The Haunting of Hill House. I've run out of patience with Mike Flanagan. I've run out of care for the bloody characters. I think it's just it's a bit gluttonous. It's a bit too much. I think it's a lot of it could be cut. A lot of it just, you could have made this like a 2.5-hour movie, slash through it all, get rid of the past sequences, which are just like, oh, will we do a jump scare this time? No.
They do have cool transitions, though. We could say that.
They do. Like, one of the earliest scenes I can remember is that bit where they're like talking to the lawyer, and he's like, well, let the press go near the house. Like, absolutely not. You really know what Hugh Crane's motive is, essentially. He has seen it, and he's essentially the one getting gaslit at that point. It's a twist that doesn't really need making, because Eleanor being gaslit is much stronger than the man that won't let anybody near his house. Which is kind of just, that's what kooky people do. It's like the elderly man from Hot Fuzz with all the guns. I don't know, it's just the ending particularly, it's like, all right, yeah, I get it. The guy has to sacrifice himself because that is expected of the narrative, but what does it really achieve? That he'll die for his children? Well, we kind of knew that. That protection is shown in the opening when he actually saves his children's lives. He doesn't have to do it again. He hasn't got to prove it again just because they're estranged, but yeah, it did nothing for me, but I guess by that point I was too busy, like, just zoned out, staring at the TV rather than watching it. It was like, I did marathon the last few. Like,
Holy
just
shit.
thought, I've got to get through this because the recording's tomorrow. But yeah, it did nothing for me. I think a lot of Haunting Hill House did nothing for me. It's kind of just that unmemorable strand of modern horror, like John Carpenter keeps mocking. It's like, I have no idea what this is. It's like, yeah, I don't either. It's not exactly abstract. It's not exactly magical movie making.
I mean, we talked about 1963's The Haunting. It's not like themes weren't present in our movies beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's a lot of good that'll come out of Haunting a Hill House, mainly more Mike Flanagan projects, but it's rather telling to me that family dilemma. I haven't seen Bly Manor, but I imagine it's more or less the same.
If you watched Bly Manor, actually, Carson. No, you said you dropped for
episodes. I watched half of it.
Yeah, it's not great. I think Bly Manor manages... Well, the main problem with Bly Manor, brief tangent, it's not directed by Mike Flanagan. He only directed the opening episode, and then everything else is directed by different people, and you feel that. It's very bog standard Netflix. Like, this one at least has a consistent style, has a consistent tone. That one is a bit all over the place narratively. Couple good performances in that. Not even all of them are great, actually, but just couple good performances. I think the ending is very strong, very emotional, very tender, and blah, blah, blah. But it feels also a bit manipulative. Like, you cry at the end, and I was emotional. Oh my god, it's sad. But also it's like, yeah, but also didn't leave me that much outside of it. Like, it gets you in the end, but it takes a long time to get there. And it does the same shit where it's, you get to the climax and it has a cliffhanger, and then there's an entire episode set in the past. It's like, oh no. And then it's again the cliffhanger before the final episode. So, kind of the same thing he did for Hill House. But also, like, again, he only directed one episode. It's not this show. Like, I think both of you wouldn't like it. I mean, you dropped it, Carson, so that says a lot. Don't watch it, Ewan, for any reason. But yes, I would recommend Midnight Mass. Yes, Carson.
Yeah. I don't know. I agree with you and pretty much on the ending here. I think, like, it's disappointing in the same way Corey and Halloween Ends is disappointing. Not because, like, inherently the idea is, like, the worst in the world. Like, I get it. There's a world where this works. But when you're 10 hours into this series, and it's a slog of 10 episodes, similar to the new Halloween trilogy, how you are 3 films in, And it's been a slog of specifically the second film in that series. Sorry, any Halloween Kills fans. Like, to present something as lackluster as Corey having like a gay relationship with Michael Myers, basically, or presenting something like, oh, the door changes for people and it's a tree house for this one. Like, fuck off. I do not care. It's it's boring. It's bad. Like, that's not something that 10 hours of investment feels paid off with. If it was a 2-hour film, maybe that really would work better. But it was just so little for so much effort.
Did you know that in the original ending, they were actually supposed to all be stuck inside the Red Room? It was supposed to be the final scene. Because if you notice, when they're all having the final jolly good moments in the show, uh, quite a few of them have that ominous window in the back, and it's framed just like all the other wide shots in the Red Room. And so it was supposed to have this very dark, like, hey, he's been sober for 2 years. Hey, everyone's having their life together, and it just kind of like pans out and the door closes or some shit like that. Um, and then it was like, you know what, for me that's not a good idea. I'm like, thank you, Mike. He saw the light. He saw the light in that. But yes, this was a jolly good conversation. I only have one last question for you guys. Which is best? Not the book. Like, which is the best adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson?
The
I
Owen
think
Wilson one.
I'm going to Owen Wilson too. Didn't watch it.
Just based on
no.
the description of it, it's like, yeah, that's a banger, man.
Oh wow, what a hit! No, it's probably the Robert Wise one, isn't it? The really knows its worth, knows its place, knows what it's doing, knows what to allude to, knows how to cast its characters, knows how to direct. I'm still shocked by the technical merits of that classic. Absolutely unbelievable. I'll probably watch it again. Like, I'm not a big Halloween believer. Obviously, it's a holiday that happens. I'm not denying the existence of Halloween. I'm just denying the fact that it should be celebrated. It's not my birthday or like.
You're not against
April
the
Fools.
pagans.
I have no care for them. I don't even know who they are.
Heretics.
Are they the Thanksgiving fellas? Are they the ones with the hats and the turkeys?
Yes. The pilgrim
no.
hats.
We
Are they the
that's
same?
ones, yeah.
I don't know. Are
don't
they
know.
pagans? The pilgrims are pagans? Are they Catholics?
Do
I
they
don't
like
know about that.
Anyway,
Do the
regardless of
pagans
that, I think
kill indigenous Americans? I don't know.
it's
They were
the pagans are
Puritans. The pilgrims were Puritans.
Who the fuck are the pagans then?
So which ones were
Pagans.
in the
Pagans are
Haunting of Hill
people who
House?
believe in like the like Celts. Those are pagans.
Ew.
The disgust is just like, holy shit. With the other
Anyway,
pointy hats,
yeah.
everyone has a pointy hat. The druids.
They're witches. They're not pagans. The witches have pointy hats, don't they? I've
This
seen
took a
Hocus
turn.
Pocus.
Wait, in Hocus Pocus, are they pagans?
Do they have hats in Hocus Pocus?
They don't have hats.
I've not seen
no, wait,
Hocus
they do have.
Pocus.
Wait, well, do they have
You haven't
hats?
seen Hocus Pocus?
No, never.
Gotta get through that in 2. Come on.
I got confused with Witches of Eastwick, which I've also not seen.
I actually did
Anyway, I
used to
think-
get confused with those two too. Actually, when I was younger,
See?
I was like, "Yeah, this is Angelica Houston or whatever." It's like, nope.
Because Jack Nicholson and Cheryl in one of them, and then the other one has the other people.
Sarah Jessica Parker. And...
So true.
Yeah. Yeah, Robert Wise is better. The Haunting, the original, the 1963 one. I think that's better than all the adaptations. I also think it's better than the book.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mainly because I think he explores what Jackson's writing about so well, and so it's just with a real sophistication that wasn't around at the time. You look at his other horror films like The Andromeda Strain or The Body Snatcher. It's kind of like a little bit pulpy, a little bit gritty, and a little bit worse. But The Haunting is like a real sophisticated look at Jackson's work. It really touches on the message of it, the core of it, the real is it or is it not a haunted house type of thing, which is just so lacking in Haunting a Hill House, which just confirms, yes, this is haunted. Let's move on. It's like, that's the big point of Jackson's work. It's like, steady on that. No, I think Weiss does a great job. Fantastic.
Nice. Carson with you as well, I think.
I echo completely. Wise is the
Yeah.
best, even better than the book. It's a perfect realization of what the book is going for. The book is excellent, don't get me wrong, but like Wise is pretty like
Takes it
perfect.
to the next level.
It's pretty wise.
Oh, pain.
Wonderful.
Yes, no, this is unanimous. I agree. Like Robert Wise's version is fantastic. I don't know if I don't know. It's I still don't know if I prefer that to the book or vice versa. If I think the book is actually still superior, but they're both in a way. Maybe it's a cop out, but also I'm the host. I can do what I want. I will say they're complementary in a way. I think they complement each other. Because I didn't love the movie as strongly as I did this time around. Like when I first watched it, it wasn't. I didn't fall in love with it like I did this time around, and it's kind of the opposite with the Haunting of Hill House. While having read with the Netflix show, sorry, like having read the book heightened the experience of the 1963 film, and it lessened that for the Netflix original. Even though I still think it's probably one of the strongest Netflix originals, which also like it isn't saying much. There aren't that many great Netflix originals miniseries. There are, but it's not like there's 50 gajillion ones. I don't know. Carson, do you have one that you'd say is you particularly love?
I'm just looking it up because I was like, well, what is like
What qualifies as
this?
a Netflix original
Well, what are
miniseries?
they? Like the miniseries? I know I'm forgetting. I like the Marvel ones. That'll play well for the Twitter fandom. I like the Netflix Marvel shows. I think they're the only good
Oh
things
yeah, you're
Marvel's
right.
ever
Actually, yeah.
done. Not
That's
Iron
right.
Fist though. That one's shit. But like Daredevil,
Okay.
that's good, right?
I have. Oh well, When They See Us is very good. The
Oh
Queen's
well, yeah.
Gambit. I don't know about that.
It's a little unfair though to be like, well, when they see us, like one of the most impactful, like beautifully crafted dramas, like that's just heartbreaking and terrifying. Like, is it better than Midnight, like The Haunting of Hill House? Yeah, I mean, it
It's
is.
a bit more socially conscious and important in that sense as well. It's a beautiful show. I watched it 2 years ago, I think. Talk about an emotional gut punch. Holy shit.
It's better than Stranger Things. I don't know if any Stranger Things fan are on the call right now, but
No, they.
I watched 2 episodes of it in my first year of uni, and I thought, brilliant, I'll get back to that tomorrow. And that was 4 years ago, and I've still not picked it back up. The only Netflix original I can like think of that I really enjoyed, like series wise, was Halston with Ewan McGregor. I thought it was really good, but I'm just a sucker for like fashion in the
What?
1980s.
Well,
Halston,
I've never heard of this.
yeah, Liza Minnelli's kind of in it. By which I mean somebody plays Liza Minnelli.
What?
It was a nice little mini series. Yeah, it was really good. I watched it through lockdown.
I.
Kirsten Rodriguez plays Liza Minnelli. It's really good.
I'm
I.
not gonna lie, I really enjoyed Is It Cake? I'll throw that out there.
I well, those are our recommendations for other than Netflix miniseries and shows, if listeners.
It's kind of like, to be fair, the big one is like Better Call Saul, but that is not an original product
Yeah,
from Netflix. That's AMC.
Yeah.
AMC.
Like that's
Is
that's
it
just
even on
Netflix
Netflix
going.
in the US? Actually,
No.
there you go. Yeah.
The plot thickens.
In Europe,
Is
That's
it-
yeah, like people say, Breaking Bad is one of the best things on
yeah.
Netflix, and I keep forgetting that it's on Netflix. Like it's treated as an original here. Bizarre, utterly bizarre. But
But
still,
yes,
this was a great conversation.
Halston has Rory Culkin as Joel Schumacher. So
Is it called Holston, like with an H?
yeah,
Holst.
Halston. It's about the fashion guy.
Oh,
The
I've been wanting to watch that. It looks good.
really good, good stuff. Bit of Andy Warhol in there as well,
Oh.
which
I just
I'm
don't
a
have
sucker for.
time, like, to invest in a series. Like,
Yeah,
I just don't have time in my day. I'm sorry, everyone.
no,
You
I've got
you did
like
your one series of the 6 months,
Right?
like with your house, and it was not worth it,
It was
unfortunately,
not worth
for you
it.
to. But still, thank you both for joining me for this conversation and this discussion. It was a great time. Great way to celebrate Halloween. Uh, but where can our listeners find you both, Carson?
Oh God.
Rolling out
Uh,
the red carpet.
I'm on Twitter at BP_movie reviews. Letterbox Carson Tamar.
And listen to Clappercast.
Yes.
The only way I keep up with new movies and shows coming out, and then I'm like, yeah, it's good that I'm not watching like 90% of
Hey, this week is strong with Halloween Ends and The Banshees of Inisherin. Two equally good movies.
That's a banger
Right.
double feature. Yeah.
One of the many films of Venice that I watched a bit drunk.
How about you, Ewan?
I was gonna be funny to say you can't leave me alone, but I've actually got things to plug now, so I kind of
Hey.
have to. You get me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Ewan Gleadow, EWANGLEADOW. A funky little groove for the people listening at home.
That should
You
be
can also
like a
get my work.
ringtone.
It should be, but I barely use my phone as is, so it may be wasted on me. Like I don't think I've had my phone off of silent for about 3 years because I don't
Oh,
like it when
bless
people
you.
try and
Oh, yeah.
speak to me. Like it's off, you know. I don't use it. But you can get me on Cult Following, Geek Show, Narc Magazine, Any Volume, Clapper, Newcastle World, Daily Star, Daily Mirror, also the Reach websites because they like it when I write about murder and drugs. You can also get my little tidbit of a podcast at
Yes.
DLTT underscore pod. No underscore, just DLTT pod. I've cocked that one right up. Anyway, it's in my Twitter bio, so you can just follow it from there. Where I've spoken to both of you now for that podcast. It's kind of like jury service where people have to show up and do an hour. But no, I think there's a couple episodes out now. I'm way ahead with episodes, so in the event of my death, years on from my funeral, there will be episodes releasing, which is how we make ourselves legacy defining. You know, my legacy will be that when I am dead, there's still stuff scheduled to go out on my website.
Aw.
That is a threat, not a fact. It will happen. You know, I don't watch LCD sound system documentaries for nothing. I watch them because I enjoy Beat Connection.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's like Carlo Gugino's monologue on stories and the importance of stories, and they keep us alive. You know.
They do. I think the second cinema shuts down, I will too.
On that lovely note, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at RickyCrow97. There's my link tree with links to everything that I do, all the short films and videos that they make. My articles are on clapperltd.co.uk. Be sure to check out as well the Uncut Gems podcast, where I sometimes less now because just scheduling is a mess. Life is hard, but where sometimes I'm a guest and co-host and talk about underrated movies that nobody else wants to talk about. Also, you can find this show on Instagram and Twitter, Death by Adaptation Pod and Death Adaptation respectively. Stay tuned, because in 2 weeks' time we're finally back to a regular schedule. No more COVID, no more delays and extra episodes and stuff. We're talking about, another very fun story. We talked about, grief and addictions with the Netflix show of The Haunting of Hill House. We're continuing that trend where we talk about living Las Vegas. So stay tuned for that. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you have a lovely Halloween and a lovely November as well. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.